we still have people arriving, so we'll take a moment to let them in so they won't interrupt our tellers. I don't want any interruptions of the story. I want to get into the mood tonight. So, all right. Okay. And so I will now introduce our first teller. Some of you may know her, Anne Penfound. She's one of those tellers that when you first see her, hear her perform, you definitely look forward to hearing her again. At least that's how it was for me. So you'll see what I mean if you haven't heard her tell before. Anne has been a professional teller since 2002. She teaches and performs original and multicultural stories. Anne says that stories stimulate our imagination and inspire us to action. I'm hoping her story doesn't inspire us to run out of the room tonight, but I know it'll be a good one. So put your seatbelt on and listen to this cautionary tale.
I was telling you that Tom Tingle was a very accomplished whistler, but you knew that when he was whistling, he was skiving off his chores, leaving them to his poor mother, who was a widow, and she had a lot of work to do. I don't think he did it intentionally. No, I think he meant to milk the cows and he meant to muck out the barn, but there was always something that caught his attention. And this particular morning, after his mother had given him a fantastic breakfast, he went down to the barn and something distracted his attention. It was a bird song. A bird song he had never heard before. And he knew a lot of bird songs. He spent a lot of time imitating them. So this morning when he heard that song, he thought, I wonder what sort of bird it is. And he went to the barn door. Well, the song seemed to be coming from a snag in the middle of the meadow. So he abandoned his chores and made his way towards the sound. But by the time he got to the snag, the sound was in a bush. And when he got to the bush, it was in a tree. He couldn't help himself. He was trying to imitate that whistle and moving from bush to tree. He forgot all about time. He forgot all about eating his lunch or any sort of food. And it wasn't until he realized that it was dark that he thought, he had no idea where he was. And those trees that he had been in amongst all day, and they were friendly, now took on a sinister tone. And he knew, and he remembered, he thought, oh no, I've heard of people coming into this forest at night and just disappearing. So he began to whistle to cheer himself up. The drizzle came down and he began to feel cold, and he thought, no, calm down. I need to look for a light. Where there's light, there's usually people. There'll be a fire, probably some food, hopefully, and a warm, dry place to stay the night. And as luck would have it, as he looked around, there, in front of him, through the trees, he saw a light. So he made his way towards it. And when he got there, he saw that it was a cottage, just a one-room cottage, because the door was open. And when he sort of looked in, he saw a fire on the back wall, a bed on one side, and a rocking chair on the other. And in the rocking chair, there was an old woman, and she was knitting and rocking. And when she saw Tom Tingle, she stopped. Tom Tingle, why don't you come in? It's warm by the fire. You could warm yourself. And Tom Tingle looked at her and he thought, well, I don't know this woman, but she knows me, so yes, it will be safe to go in. And he stepped into the house and right up to the fire, and before he knew it, he was toasting himself, trying to get rid of that drizzle that was on his clothes, and gently steaming. And he turned back to front, to back to front, steaming as he went. And while he did, the old woman was looking at him, and she was knitting. Knit one, purl one, knit one, purl one, and then she stopped. Tom Tingle, why don't you take off your socks and your shoes? They must be wet. Tom looked down at his shoes and his socks, and they were wet. So he took them off and he gave them to the old woman, who put them in the middle of the room, shoes on the bottom, socks on the top. Then she went back to her knitting, and she rocked back and forth and back and forth as Tom steamed gently. And then she stopped. Tom Tingle, give me your shirt. And Tom Tingle began to unbutton his shirt, and he took it over his shoulders and pulled it off his arms, and he gave it to the old woman, who shook it out, flattened it out to get rid of the wrinkles, and then folded it one on top of the other and put it on top of his socks. And then she went back to her rocking chair, picked up her knitting and began to knit, rocking forward and back and forward. And she stopped. Tom Tingle, give me your trousers. Well, Tom undid his trousers, and then he pushed them down over his hips and down to his feet, and took his feet out, and he gave them to the old woman, who stretched them out and folded them up and put them on the pile on top of his shirt. And he was left standing there in his long johns. The old woman had gone back to her rocking chair and was knitting. Knit one, purl one, rocking backwards and forwards, and she stopped. Tom Tingle, give me your long... Tom Tingle ran for the bed. He dived under the covers, and then he took off his long johns and he gave them to the old woman, who stretched them out and then folded them up and put them on top of his trousers. The old woman went back to her knitting and her rocking, backwards and forwards and backwards, and she stopped. Tom Tingle, give me your skin. And Tom Tingle began to take off his skin. It peeled right off his shoulders, down past his waist and his hips. It peeled very easily, just like skin should. And when he had got it off, he gave it to the old woman, and she took it and stretched it out and folded it over and put it on the pile in the middle of the room. And then she went back. Knit one, purl one, knit one, purl one, and she stopped. Tom Tingle, give me your flesh. And under those covers, Tom Tingle began to pull off his flesh, bit by bit by bit, until he had a big bundle of flesh. And he gave it to the old woman, who took it and put it in the middle of the room on the pile. And then she went back to her rocking chair and began to rock and knit backwards and forwards and backwards. And she stopped. Tom Tingle, Tom Tingle, give me your bones. And under those bed covers, Tom Tingle began to click, 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 click off his bones, bone by bone, click by click, until he had a huge bundle of bones and his skull. And he gave them to the old woman, who put them in a big pile, and his skull on the top. And then she went back to her knitting and her rocking, backwards and forwards and backwards. And her shoulders sank and her head dropped forward onto her chest, and her knitting dropped into her lap. The old woman had fallen asleep. And so Tom Tingle fell asleep too. Now he was awoken in the morning by the sun coming in through the window. He pulled down the covers and he peeked at the old woman. And she was still asleep. So he very carefully pushed off those covers, got himself out of bed, and tiptoed over to the pile in the middle of the room, ever so quietly. And then he proceeded to take his bones and click, 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 click into place. He got his flash and back into place. And then he picked up his skin. He stepped into those legs and pulled them up over his hips, up his trunk and over his shoulders, into his arms. And it fit him, just like skin should. Next came his trousers, over his legs and up his hips, and buttoned them up. And then his shirt into his arms and buttoned that up. Then he picked up his socks and put them on one by one. And then he picked up his shoes and he tiptoed very quietly towards the door, which was still open. Very quietly, he put on his shoes, did up the laces. Then he ran like hell. He ran and ran and ran and ran until he could not run anymore, because he's absolutely exhausted. But when he looked around, he knew where he was. He was in the lane that ran by his farm. And so he ran again back into that barn and he swept it clean. And then he milked those cows until they were absolutely dry. He filled the manger with hay. He chopped some wood. And then he took a bucket of that milk and a bundle of wood and took it back up to his mother in the farmhouse. Oh, she had laid out a beautiful breakfast. Oh, so tasty. And he was free, absolutely famished. I mean, there was cereal, there was porridge, bacon, eggs, sausage, fried tomato, his favorite, and baked beans, and then toast and marmalade, and always a pot of tea. Oh, he just made short work of that. And as he was eating, his mother picked up her knitting. And she went over to the rocking chair, which was beside the fire, and she began to rock as she knitted. And she rocked back and forth, knit one, purl one, knit one, purl one, And she stopped. And she looked at her son, Tim Tingle. Tim Tingle. And she smiled. Thank you.
Yikes. Wonderful. If people want to turn on their mics to give her a hand, that's absolutely fine and acceptable. And just remember to turn your mics off again. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Anne.
That was
Now they could do it.
creepily wonderful. Creepily wonderful.
Thank you.
I want to let you know that I have put some information in the chat about an upcoming Zoom performance that Anne has on December 17th at 5 o'clock. It has the link there where you could sign up to register. And it also has her website if you want to go to her website and learn more about the wonderful things that Anne does. Thank you so much for participating tonight, Anne. Okay, everyone. I'll remind you to turn off your microphones again and get set for our next teller, Rebecca Hum. Rebecca is a master storyteller who takes the experiences of ordinary people and creates stories just to show just how extraordinary those people are. She's traveled to 6 continents collecting stories and shares them with young, old, and in between. Now, the story she has tonight might take us to an in-between place, an eerie place. Let's just hope she brings us back. Rebecca?
Well, it's good to be here, even though I'm just in a little box and I can't see you at all. The story I wanted to share with you tonight, I heard from Dan Ketting when he was at the Florist Festival quite a few years ago. And it's a ballad from the French-Canadian trapper life. And this is an adaptation of that. So not to scare you too much, I am going to sing just a beginning part of that ballad for you to bring you into the story. Ready? Lie down, you pretty little bride. Lie easy as you can. You're young and unaccustomed yet to sleeping with a man. Oh, the long hours of the night passed. The snow fell deep, and the moon, full moon, shone bright as it lighted there across the cabin floor. And the young bride, she rose up silently, and she ran quickly out the door. And the man, he rose up, and out the door he ran. Oh, an angry man was he. Oh, he chased his bride out into the night, and the moon shone so brightly. But nowhere could he see his bride. And the night all around was still. And then through the moonlight shine, he saw her cresting the hill. He followed her tracks through the deep new snow, and he called her name. But all he heard was a lone wolf's howl, calling back to him again. He found her gown spread out there on the snow, as smooth as a new bed sheet. But the tracks that led on 2 feet, that led there, now were no longer human feet. The hair rose up along his neck, and his angry heart was gone. You see, where the 2-footed tracks had stopped, now 4-footed tracks led on. Slowly he turned and began to walk, and then he began to run. And she, who had been the prey, turned to follow the tracks, and he knew that the hunt was on. Now, it's a cold bed where this man lies, and crimson is the snow. And all I can say is, oh, trapper man, beware, beware, oh, trapper man, if you would take a wild, wild bride. The end.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Rebecca. Wow. Oh, weird, freaky, and with a song. Oh, you don't often get a song in a weird story. Sorry.
The idea of a ballad and having that kind of a eeriness in the ballad and that warning sign really appealed to me.
Yes.
And the idea of the wild bride,
yeah,
the woman who could come back.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Wow, amazing. Yeah.
Thank you all for hearing it tonight. Thanks for inviting me to be part of it.
Thank you for telling. Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, there you are. Okay, excellent.
All right.
So Lance, I know some things about, I don't know a lot about Lance, but I know at least 3 things. He has 3 loves: his family, his cars, and maybe I should put cars twice, and stories.
Yeah.
He is full of stories of all kinds, and he does them well. Tonight, he is bursting to tell us a story about the good old days when he was younger and full of mystery and some mischief.
Yeah. Thank you. In 1968, I was 21 years old, and I had the worst job possible. I worked at this company that made parts for Boeing, and I just hated my job. And it was not a good part of my life. Well, 3 of my buddies got a hold of me and said, we are going to hop freights to Mexico and live in Mexico. Sounded great to me. So we started out in Tacoma, and we were hopping freights just like you see in the movies or whatever. We're jumping on box cars and riding on flat cars and riding on just everything imaginable, in the box cars, on top of the box cars, and in coal cars, just everything. We went down the coast. It took us about 2 weeks to get to Mexico. And once we hit the border, we jumped on a bus, went to Mazatlan, got an apartment on the beach. Our goal was to just be beach bums and do nothing other than enjoy our environment and drink cheap tequila and meet Mexican girls. Well, I got real bored real quick with all of this laying on the beach thing. And about this time, I met a young lady who was a nanny for a couple that were there with their children. And she said, well, I'm heading back to Los Angeles. Why don't you meet me up there? So that was my excuse to leave the three guys. I told them I was taking off, took a bus to the border. At the border, U.S.-Mexican border, I started hitchhiking. And did really well with that. Just a lot of nice people, great rides, and eventually I ended up in Burbank. I was then hitchhiking in Burbank, and this guy came along, and he had a van, an old, kind of hippie van, and said, come on, I'm going to Mendocino. My girlfriend lives there. She's got a house on a cliff overlooking the ocean, and I can give you a ride that far. So sounded great. Nice ride. We get there, and it's kind of late at night. He says, well, why don't you just stay in the van? You can just spend the night in the van. In the morning you can take off. And okay, great, no problem. So I spend the night in the van. Everything's fine. And the next morning he comes out to the van and says, why don't you come on inside and just have some breakfast? My girlfriend and her roommate are in there, and so come on in and just have something to eat before you hit the road. So I went in the house, beautiful house. They were caretakers in this. It was actually a round house. It was very cool. But went in, he had his girlfriend there, and her roommate was there. She was friendly. She was very nice. But I was 21 and she was 28. So she was kind of old. And, so I didn't, a young guy, I would normally have been kind of maybe perhaps flirtatious in a situation like that, but I just wasn't. I just enjoyed the breakfast and figured I'd be moving on. Well, things kind of clicked, and this young lady said, I'd like you to stay here with me. Here's the deal. This was on a Friday. She said, here's the deal. Let's hang out together all weekend, and no matter what happens between the two of us, Monday morning you leave. Just go, no matter how, whatever happens this weekend. So worked for me. So boy did we have a really good time all weekend. Friday night she had a date with a guy. He came to pick her up. She said, oh, by the way, this guy's coming along with us. The guy handled it really well. We went to a bar called the Seagull, and everybody in that town, they sang or did poetry or something in this bar. It was great. Got back to her place. She sent him on his way. Spent the night there. The next day we got up, went horseback riding, and she had a date with a different guy that night, and he was coming over for dinner. He did not like me and did not like the situation, but anyway, that's the way it was. So that was Saturday. Sunday was a lot of fun, and she gave me a picture. And when she was in college, she was in a student film, and they took a frame from this film, and it was a picture of her leaning up against a tombstone with a potted plant between her legs. This is the picture that she gave me that you're seeing behind me. And okay, great. So Sunday was great. Sunday night was great. Monday morning rolls around, and I wake up, and I don't know if she was awake or not and just pretending to be asleep. And I'm not sure what the deal was about me having to leave, but a deal was a deal. So I very quietly got dressed and packed up my little bag that I had with me and tiptoed out the door, walked down her long driveway, stuck out my thumb. And not very long later, a gentleman picked me up, and nice guy, and picks me up in his car and took me quite a ways, and rode with him most of the day. And he said, well, I'm heading to this party. It's on the beach. And, why don't you just come and join in the party with me? Great. Sounds good. So I go, and this is 1968 hippie hardcore, lots of hair, lots of drugs, big bonfire, alcohol, people just, being nuts. And it was great. But we're sitting around the campfire at one point, and we're passing joints around and you know, swigging out of bottles, and I don't know what came over me, but I decided that I was going to tell a story to this crowd of people that didn't know me and I didn't know them, but they had really taken me in. So I started telling them about my sister. And I said, you know, I had this wonderful sister, and well, she passed away. She died. And it was very sad. And I don't want you guys to, I hope you don't think this is really weird, but one day when I was visiting her grave, I took a photograph of her tombstone. And when I sent it in to be developed and the picture came back, there was my sister leaning up against the tombstone. Pulled out the picture, showed it to them, and these guys went nuts. They just, you know, oh my God, oh. And they could not believe it, but there was the proof. There was my sister leaning up against her tombstone with a potted plant between her legs and a smile on her face. Well, I like to think, you know, I got up the next day and took off. And I wonder, since we're coming up on Halloween, if there were quite a few people there, if not one or two of them don't use the opportunity to say, you know, one time I met this guy at a party. He had this photo. It was his dead sister leaning up against her tombstone. Can you believe that? Thank you.
That's such a mean trick. But fun.
That's her right there. I hope she's
hey, it's proof.
Yeah.
Can't be disputed.
Nope.
Well, I love that. That was wonderful. Thank you, Lance. Now, our next teller is Audra Sisak. Audra is our new president of the Seattle Storytellers Guild, and we're really excited about her coming in and taking Barry's place to help us continue to bring good work to the storytelling world. Audra is a stand-up comedian. She's a storyteller, and now she is an actor. She has a new movie that will premiere on the 26th in downtown Seattle. She's going to be there, and if you want to meet her in person, this is your opportunity. I have a link. I'll put a link in for you so that you'll know how to get to that movie if you like. Tonight, Audra is going to share a true personal story with a spooky edge. Take it away, Audra.
All right. Thank you very much. Gosh, all these stories have been great so far tonight, and I'm not sure exactly how mine's going to fit into all of that. So we'll see. You know, logic and reason have always been my bread and butter. I'm a logical, analytical person, and I never really was into the spiritual world. And especially growing up during my teenage years, because, you know, that's not cool. Who goes around believing in God and spirits, right, when you're a teenager, especially in the 90s. So I lost myself in my hobbies during high school, hyper focusing on, you know, like music and cheer. I was actually a cheerleader. Yeah, go figure. I was. My mom spent most of her time at work and taking care of my grandpa. So, you know, there wasn't a lot of connection there, but you know, my mom did her best doing what she needed to. So there's my grandpa. Actually, I called him Holly Grandpa. Because you see, when you have two grandpas in a family, you have to distinguish between the two. And the way my brain decided was, I'm going to name him after the dog. So he got named Holly Grandpa after his dog. Yeah, he loved it. I wasn't particularly close with him. You know, I loved him. You know, I knew him growing up. But my mom, like I said, took care of him because he was getting sick. So one night I was having a lot of particular bad insomnia. A lot of you don't know I have epilepsy and I'm autistic. And so my brain just keeps going a lot. And this one night I couldn't figure out why I was just not being able to rest, tossing, turning, heart racing, and my thoughts just couldn't focus. And I'm thinking, great, here's another panic episode. So I shut my eyes and I focus on my breathing, as my therapist says. I take a breathe in. Okay, the cold has washed away. Feels like a warm blanket now. The uneasy feelings start to vanish, and there is a sense of relief. I guess there is something to this thing that my therapist keeps telling me. I close my eyes once more, and I open them. And I'm not in my bedroom anymore. I'm in a farmhouse. I can hear the grass blowing in the wind, the wrestling against each other, the warmth of the sun directly on me. It's so bright I can barely see, but I know that I'm at a farmhouse. I can smell hay and my brain knows where I'm at. A clock is sitting outside, and it is the one clock that is sitting from my bedroom that's on my mantle. And it reads 1:32 a.m. and the hands have stopped. It's a strange feeling to be somewhat concerned for your safety, but not that much because I didn't want to leave the place. It felt familiar, like I'd been there before. Suddenly, out of nowhere, I'm standing there. And Holly Grandpa appears in front of me. He doesn't move. But yet somehow he tells me he loves me, that he's my guardian angel, and that both my aunts will be pregnant and have children someday. He told me it was time to go. I cried because I didn't want to leave. That place felt safe. And in an instant, I was awake. I look at the clock. It's 2:30 a.m. Okay, it was a dream. I go back to bed because I've got to get up for cheer practice tomorrow at 5 a.m. I'm completely exhausted and I find my way to practice. Still thinking about this dream because so much it felt real. And I can remember sitting in the gymnasium and I was in princess yoga stretching pose. And if anybody knows what that is, you have to sit on the floor like your actual princess and stretch your back. And my mom walks in and I look at the clock and it is 6:32 a.m. She comes to tell me that Holly Grandpa passed away during the night. I went numb and I could not think of anything else to say except, what was his time of death? And she explained to me that the doctors had ruled his time of death as 1:45 a.m., but that the event that took his life had actually began at 1:32 a.m. I have a logical mind, and I still don't know to this day why God chose to let me see and feel this like glorious life beyond the one that we have now, but I am forever grateful. I had a grandfather who I wasn't particularly close with, but who is now forever a part of my life. I still see him. He's around me all the time. I still see him walk around my house. And sometimes I still have dreams about him where he pulls me into his world with this farmhouse that I've never seen before ever, but still feels familiar. And FYI, I told both my aunts the day that he passed what he had told me. Nobody believed me. Each one of them got pregnant and had a baby. I now have 2 cousins. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Mm,
Amazing. Thank you.
yeah.
True
Pretty
story. Yeah, all
amazing.
true. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we always, have these questions in life about what's after this and is there anything after this? And now you know for sure. Yeah,
At least for me.
for you anyway. Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Wow. Oh, hi, Pat Peterson. So I just saw you there. Thank you, Audra. That was wonderful. And
You're
thank you
welcome.
for sharing that personal story. Pretty amazing. Now, the only question I have is, what's up with my relatives? Nobody came to me and told me nothing. I'll still wait. In the meantime, I guess we'll have another story. Our next teller is Elder Barry McWilliams. Barry has recently retired as president of the Seattle Storytellers Guild. Now he's called elder because he is truly an elder in his church. And if you Google him, you might actually find him doing some sermons. Now, Barry has played a really significant role keeping the guild going before, during, and after COVID. He is also our tech guru, as you might notice tonight. Recently, Barry was honored by the Guild. We inducted him into the Golden Circle of Storytellers, and that's a lifetime honor of telling. Now, tonight, Barry will use his storytelling talent to tell us an unusual ghost story. Barry?
Well, having said that about me, now I got to come through with a story. This story I found in Claire Alger's book Gaelic Ghosts, and it's also in her book Ghosts Go Haunting. But I've adapted it to some degree. You may or may not. You'll probably recognize the basic outline, but it's a little bit different. Every village and town in England and Scotland has ghosts. And there's a reason why this is the case. And the fact is that they have creaky old buildings and houses. They have old churches and lots of graveyards. And because of this, lots of times there are ghosts. And what you may not realize, though, is that every village and town also has a guild for ghosts. There's a ghost guild in every town. And of course, there's somebody to head up the guild. And in this particular case, it's the ghost master. Now, the ghost master of this one village, when he used to have a head on his shoulders, was the CEO of a very powerful company. And his employees were always very happy to work with him. He took very good care of them, and they produced quite well. Now he's the head of another company, this time of ghosts. And it was always his determination that even though they are rather uncomfortable with their new situation, that they might be somewhat content in it, and that they might be somewhat productive in all their shrieking and creaking and otherwise spooky things. In fact, he took a great deal of pride in the fact that his group was as happy as a ghost could possibly be with their tasks. Well, this was until a young ghost was sent to join their company. Now the ghosts are organized, and there's a council somewhere of boggles and banshees that kind of distributes the ghosts employees of these various guilds. And this one kid arrived because he was a youngster. I mean, he was just out of his teens when he became a ghost. And though everything had been going fine in this guild, he was a very discontented young man. And very soon, all the ghosts found that he was hard to get along with. he was very unhappy about his lifelessness. He missed his Game Boy. He really wanted to sleep in, and yet instead he's moping around in the corners, refusing to find a place of his own to haunt. And when the other ghosts would find a place for him, he didn't like it at all. This old village had plenty of places for a ghost to spook in. I mean, there were old shattered mansions, there were church graveyards, there were basements and attics, and there were belfries with bats and everything, but he did not like them. The houses were all dark and damp and dismal. They said they make his bones ache. And he didn't like the color of his shroud. He said it was too gray and too yellow, and he wanted a whiter shroud than that. And he didn't know why he had to go about haunting. I mean, there are all these other ghosts, and they like to do their haunting. Why do I have to do it? Why me? Well, then there was the chains. He did not like having to haul around those clanky chains all the time. I mean, it was a real bother to him to now be a ghost. And so when they tried to reason with him, he just said he never asked to be a ghost. He would not pretend to like being a ghost. In fact, they could go about their ghosting and just leave him be. So he went around moping and complaining and wandering aimlessly, and tripping the others up when they were too busy to see him underfoot. And he took all the fun out of it for everybody else, and their morale was rotting away. Finally, they got up a petition for the ghost master. It was written out on some yellowed legal paper by one of the ghosts who used to be a solicitor in his former life. And it stated all their grievances against that newcomer and demanded the ghost master do something about him. Well, when the chief read it, he turned about 3 shades paler. I mean, it gave him a shiver, and he's the head of the ghosts. Something like this had never happened to him in this world or in the previous one. Well, perhaps he never had a teenager. Maybe that could explain it. But he had such a pride in his guild, and it was falling apart like the tattered curtains of an old abandoned house. So he sent for the new ghost, and he made him read those grievances. What has come over you, young haunt? You're upsetting the entire guild. They should be wailing elsewhere, not at me. Well, it's not me, it's them. They're always nagging me to be a proper ghost. And I don't want to be a ghost. They're telling me to screech this and to clank that and to creak around in the shadows and to knock things about or let in a chilly draft. They just need to chill. Well, why don't you pay some more attention to them? You have all the makings of a very good wraith. Because I didn't want to be a ghost at all. Not before nor after. It's just not me. Well, the ghost master was left pretty speechless. I mean, he'd never heard this before. And before he even had a wit to come up with any kind of answer, the kid said, "Can't I be something else besides a ghost? Can't you do something about it?" Well, the ghost master scratched his head and thought about it a little bit and realized, well, he's never going to be able to reason with this kid. There's nothing he can do to argue with him that's going to change his mind. So he said, well, I'll go to the Council of Boggles and Banshees, and maybe they'll give you permission for something different. Well, he was gone for a week or two. I mean, visiting the council is always a slow thing because they only meet at night in the weeest hours of the morning. And they're always well in bed before the sun comes up. But anyway, so finally he comes back and he says, well, young man, they've given you permission to be something besides a ghost. And how would you like to be yourself again? Myself again? Well, I don't know about that. Well, why don't you just check it out and come back to me and tell me what you think? And so the young man was gone for a while. And when he came back, he said to the ghost master, it just won't work. Why not? Well, there's the matter of my room. When I became a ghost, they gave the room to my younger brother. And he moved all his stuff in there. And it's a mess, but he doesn't want to give it up. Well, what about your job that you had? Are you kidding? I worked as a night stalker in a grocery store. And I was working nights then, and I don't like it. Didn't like it then. I don't like it now. And besides, they gave my job to a new guy who has a wife and a baby on the way. I don't want to put him out of a job. Well, what about your girlfriend? Well, my girlfriend now is the girlfriend of my best friend. And since she started going with him, I realized a few things about her. She talks all the time, and all she ever says is silly. I don't know what I saw in her. I'm not really interested in her anymore. I don't think I need to go back to being myself. Well, what about your mom and dad? Wouldn't they appreciate it? Well, the truth is, the neighbors would really wonder what was going on. I don't think it's a good idea. Well, the poor ghost master looked at him and says, well, maybe you would like to be someone else. It's a little bit hard to squeeze you in, but how about a doctor? Are you kidding? My father was a doctor. He was on call 24 hours a day. He was never home for dinner, and he never made it to any of my sports games. I don't want to be a doctor. Well, how about a lawyer? Law? How am I to know what's right and wrong? I mean, nobody likes lawyers anyway. Maybe a farmer. A farmer? They're up before dawn. They're working till after dark, 24 hours a day. It's nothing but hard work. And they don't have any friends because they're alone all the time out there with just the mule or a tractor or something. How about a schoolmaster? Are you kidding? A schoolmaster with brats like me sitting out there driving them crazy? I would not want to be a schoolmaster. Well, how about a financier? They make lots of money. Why don't you go check it out? So the young man went and he checked it out. And after a week or so, he came back and says, I don't want to be a financier. Why not? They make all that money. They have nice homes. They have nice cars. Yeah, but they work nonstop to have that money. And what's worse, they never have any time to play with all those toys they buy. They worry all night long about keeping the money that they work all day to make. And the truth is, their stomachs are always upset. Their heads are always aching. I absolutely don't want to be a financier. Well, can't you come up with something to be? Why don't you go and look around a little bit and see if you can come up with an idea? And so the young man went off, and a couple weeks later he came back, and that ghost master didn't hardly recognize him because before he was always, ugh, but now he was so happy and joyful. I got an idea. I know exactly what I want to be. I know what I want. Well, what is it? I want to be a cat. A cat. Why would you want to be a cat? And now don't tell me I can't do this, because this is really what my heart wants. I want to be a cat. And I know just the cat that I want to be. Come with me and I'll show you. And so that night they set off down through the dark lanes and winding burrows of that village. They came to a house on the square, a quiet house, fairly dark house, and they just floated right up in the house and up the stairs and into the bedroom. Ghosts don't need to worry about doors, you know. And there was a child in the bed, and he looked like he'd been very ill, and he was just kind of laying there, and he was so pitiful. And his mother was sitting there, and his father was standing there, and they looked so sad. And there was a single candle in the room, and when the ghost came in, it flickered a little bit, but it was not the candle or the ghost that made this parents shiver. It was their worry about their child. And then the young ghost points to the foot of the bed and says, see that there, see that there? And there in the blankets at the foot of the bed was this little kitten, curled up, sound asleep. And the young ghost said, I want to be that cat. Well, you know, squeezing you into that little cat's going to be hard, but I'll see what I can do. And he started to wave his hands. Pretty soon there was only one ghost left in the room. And he kind of smiled because he knew he could go back to his guild and they would be happy once again. And there would be no discontented young ghost to cause problems. And so he disappeared. Meanwhile, that kitten woke up, noticed he had 4 legs and a couple of really, nice ears and a swishy tail. And he started to jump around with joy and happiness. He was so happy to be a cat. And the boy, just kind of started to open his eyes and look, and his eyes got wider, and then the kitten came up to him, and like kittens always do, nudged up to him and made friends. And pretty soon the boy's smiling and he's laughing, and his parents are so happy because the doctors were so worried about the child because he had seemed to have no more interest in living, and all of a sudden this little kitten was giving him such a feeling of life. And there never was a cat probably before or after this that was so petted and so loved because of what he did in bringing this child out of his despondency. Well, that cat grew up and became a very fine tomcat. All the tabbies around just adored him. And he had many a fight with the toms. Lost a bit of an ear, or a tip of his tail, but he had 9 lives. And he was always very careful not to lose all of them at once. And so finally, after a very long life, and certainly he was a very pampered cat, he was willing to set aside that last life because he knew, in fact, he'd known before, that since cats have 9 lives, they don't become ghosts. And that's what happened to the ghost who didn't want to be a ghost. And Pat, I hope you enjoyed that story.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you, Barry. That was fun. I don't know if I'll look at cats the same way now. Maybe there's a little ghosty in some of them. Thank you for that. Okay, we're just moving right along very well here. Our next teller is Marilyn Grevstad. Marilyn is a member of the Storytellers Guild. She's been a member for 24 years, and I think we're only 30 years old, right, Barry? The guild is only 30.
Oops, we're 40 years old. We just had our
40. Okay, so Marilyn has been with us, with the guild, for over half the time. She, as she spent time in the guild, she wasn't a teller at the beginning, but she spent more and more time listening to tellers, and I guess she was influenced to try it herself So for the last 10 years, she's been telling folktales to grown-ups and children. She has a 5.5-year-old grandson, and every week she tells him a story over Zoom. Isn't that great? Well, tonight, Marilyn's going to share a story with us, and this one, hopefully she will not tell to her grandson anytime soon. Marilyn?
This story is called Sock Doll. It's a story that was collected by Richard Chase in the Appalachians. Richard Chase went all through the Appalachians, and he took the old stories that people had been telling for years and years, and he didn't want them to die, so he recorded them and put them into some books. So this one, one of the books is called Jack Tales. Jack was a young man, and Jack was brave. Jack wasn't afraid of witches or haunts or ghosts. He was a brave young man. Now, Jack needed money, and he heard in the next county there was a miller who would hire somebody to watch his mill, but one young man after another had come there to watch the mill, and they all died before morning. Well, Jack wasn't afraid, so he went, said to the miller, "I'll watch your mill." And the miller said, "Okay, listen, if you can find out who haunts that mill, I'll give you a bag of gold." Oh, Jack liked that idea. So he set out to stay in the mill that night, and he said, "I'll need some food." And the miller said, "Sure. Here's a bag." And in the bag was a ham bone with lots of meat still on it. Jack went into the mill, and it was a big room. At one end was the giant stone wheel. Outside the wheel was the big round wheel that scooped up the water from the stream and turned that stone. At the other end, there was a fireplace with a crackling fire. Jack went there, and he sat down by the fire, and he started picking the piece of the ham off the bone. He put them in the frying pan. He was frying them. Got a handful of flour, and he put that in, and he was stirring it and making gravy, and that gravy was bubbling. And then Jack looked up, and up near the ceiling were 12 little windows, and they were all open. And as Jack was stirring, cats jumped onto the windowsill of those windows. Pretty soon, there was a cat in front of every window. But Jack kept stirring his gravy, waiting for it to thicken, and then one of those cats went, "Hey, fish! Oops! Oops!" They jumped down one by one. Oops! Oops! Pretty soon Jack was surrounded by all those cats. And then one of the cats reached the candle. Jack had put up 12 of them for the light, and he reached the candle and he went, "Psst," put out the light. Then the next cat, "Psst," put out that light. "Psst," put out that light. The next cat, "Psst," put out that light. And pretty soon they were all out except for one. And then the biggest cat, great huge black cat, came over and psst, he put out the last light. Well, Jack just sat there stirring that gravy and stirring that gravy. And then that biggest cat came over to him, all friendly like, and was rubbing against Jack's legs, purring. And then the cat took his paw and he went, "Supta!" And he tried to put his hand in the gravy, but Jack knocked him away. And he said, "Get your doll out of my sup." Kept stirring the gravy. And then that cat came over again and he rubbed against Jack's legs like he wanted to be friends. And then he took his paw and the cat said, "Supta!" But Jack pushed his hand away, his paw away. And Jack said, "If you do that once more, I'm going to cut off that paw." Now, Jack had a knife. His granddaddy had given him. It was a very sharp knife. He honed it and kept it in good shape. And that cat came up and he put his paw in the gravy. Jack took out his knife and he cut off that paw, and that cat went, "Ah!" He jumped up onto the windowsill and went out the window, and all those other cats went, "Ah! Ah! Ah! Ah!" They all jumped out the window. Well, Jack looked down at that frying pan, and it wasn't a paw. It was a woman's hand with a ring on it. And then Jack thought, I think I know what happened. Those other men that came to this mill were poisoned. So Jack took that frying pan, he took it outside and he scrubbed it and he scoured it and he rubbed it and he cleaned it and then he dried it and put it in, and he went to sleep. The next morning, he ate his ham and gravy and he went to the miller's house. And he said, "Good morning, sir. I'd like to talk to your wife, if you please." And the miller said, "Oh, my wife's not feeling very well. She hurt her hand last night." "Oh, I'm sorry, but if I could, it'll only take a minute." So he went into the wife's bedroom. She was all wrapped up in sheets and blankets, and he said, "Excuse me, ma'am, I'd like to see your right hand." She stuck out her hand, but it was her left hand. "I'm sorry, but I'd like to see your right hand." Well, she scrunched all around in those blankets, and then she put out her left hand again. He said, "No, I'm going to see your right hand." He reached in and he pulled out her arm, and he looked, and there was no hand. And Jack said, "Where is your cat skin?" She said, "In the dresser." He looked in the top dresser drawer, and sure enough, there was a black cat's skin. He took that skin and he stuffed it in his burlap sack, the same one that had the hand. And he said, "Now, unless you want harm to come to your friends, because I will tell your husband unless you give me the addresses of all those other helpers." And so she gave him the address of all the other helpers. And Jack went up the road. He stopped at each house and he collected the cat skin from that house. He put them all into the burlap bag and he went back to the mill and he lit them on fire. And there was a great big fire. He burned all of them to ashes. Well, he met with the miller, and the miller said, "Jack, I want to thank you. And Jack, don't forget, I've got a bag of gold for you." He gave Jack the bag of gold, and well, last time I heard, Jack was doing all right.
Yeah.
Watch
Thank
out,
you, Marilyn.
watch out for black cats.
Uh-huh. Yes, and Diane would say of all the other ones too. Thank you, Marilyn. Boy, that Jack, he makes off with a lot of gold. That's all I have to say. Thought. Judith Alexander is our new vice president of the Guild, but she isn't a new member. She has been with the Guild since the 1990s. Judith plays a significant role in holding us together and keeping the Guild alive. Her enthusiasm and dedication are really inspiring, and so is her storytelling. Judith has a knack for finding interesting tales from different cultures. Tonight, she's taking us to China, reminding us that ghosts live everywhere.
Thank you. Thank you for that great introduction. Excuse me. I think that'll work.
Does anybody know how I can get the sound to get louder on my computer? I can barely hear anyone.
Oh, sorry.
So,
Spotlight Judith Berry, and Patty, you need to turn we need to mute you and have somebody there with you to help you turn with your volume. Okay.
so long ago in China, there was a man named Ah Shang. And Ah Shang was not only clever, he was brave. And so he decided he would catch himself a ghost. So on one of these fall nights with the moon high in the sky, he headed into the forest along the darkest path. And after a bit, he saw a shadowy shape flipping between the trees. And then a cold finger touched him on the shoulders, and a voice asked, "Pardon me, can you tell me the way to town?" Despite his bravery, Ah Chung had goosebumps. Who are you? A ghost, of course. And who are you? Ah Chung answered, "Well, I'm a guest too, a ghost too. Aha. And I'm going to town so we could go together." Ah, that would be nice. And who are you planning to scare tonight? Oh, I hadn't thought about it yet. I guess I'll just see who's up when we get there. Who are you planning to scare? Well, you see, there's this man, and for some time, I've been thinking to look him up. He thinks he's very clever. His name is Ah Chung. Oh, well, as I say, I'm going to town and we can go along together. That's a good idea. And we could take turns carrying one another. It would make the journey go faster. Very well. And Ah Chung climbed on the ghost's back. The ghost carried Ah Chung, complaining, "You are the heaviest ghost I've ever met." "Oh, well, that's because I just died last week. You know, new ghosts are always heavy." "Ah, how far to town?" "Oh, it's about 3 miles." "Ah, So after a while, they traded places, and well, the ghost didn't weigh even as much as a pillow. So Ah Chung just kept going. They came to a little river, and he splashed right in. Ah, why? Why do you make so much noise when you walk? Oh, well, I told you. I just died last week, and, I'm getting used to being a ghost. Oh. Well, at this point, Ah Chung wasn't quite so scared, maybe, of the ghost. And his bravery got the upper hand, and he said, well, I am new at this, and maybe you could give me some tips. Is there anything that we ghosts need to be afraid of? Anything about humans that that I should know? Oh, yeah. Spit. If a human spits on you, a ghost, the ghost cannot escape. Oh, I'll be careful, said Ah Chung. And when they got to the gates of the city, the ghost said, so, you know how I should find Ah Chung's house? Oh, yes. Yes, I used to live in this city, and I can take you right to Ah Chung's house. I know where it is. Fine. And so, when they got to Ah Chung's outer gates, the ghost said, now, you watch, and I will show you how I am going to drive Ah Chung mad. And there was a horse. The ghost had changed himself into a horse. You wait and see. I am going to march in to Ah Chung's house. This talking horse, it'll scare him to death, especially when I complain about the oats he feeds his animals. In that moment, Ah Chung leapt on the horse's back and spit on his neck. And ha 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 to you, Ah Chung. I am Ah Chung, and I have just caught you, and I can use a horse in my fields to do all the work. A talking horse is a bonus, even if you decide to complain about the food. And so it was that Ah Chung had a horse, talking horse, for many years. It's said that a clever man can outwit any ghost. And that's the story of Ah Chung catches a ghost.
Thank you. So we have to remember to not freak out, that we can outsmart a ghost if we happen to see one. No, unless it's a nice one, like Audra's grandfather. We have
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for coming, and thank you for sharing with us. We have one last teller. That's Anne Brendler. Anne is a very enthusiastic teller. She's a member of our guild. She is our treasurer, who has been our treasurer for more years than she thought she would. But she's still willing to do that. Yeah, and we're happy. And also, she participated in our elder tells at retirement homes. We would go there, and she was very comfortable telling stories to that age audience, and she is very comfortable to telling to younger audiences also. Anne has a really interesting story I am dying to hear. So let's hear it, Anne. Thanks.
Thank you, Eva. A few years ago, I volunteered at the Museum of Flight here in Seattle, and I got to attend a Halloween party for the children visitors, and I had been asked to tell a story, and this is a story that I told. It is from a book called Ghosts of the Air by a man named Martin Hayden. I'm not sure how he says his name, but that's what it looks like when it's written. The story is called Real Life. The young aviator, with his brand new pilot's license in his pocket, was flying his very own, a gift from his grandfather, very own Cherokee Piper plane. It was red and white, the paint just as bright as a brilliant day, because it was a brand new plane. He was very proud of it, and he loved flying. He took this plane out on a beautiful, beautiful day, and the clouds were just mounded up, these great cumulus clouds, white and brilliant. And the young man was having a wonderful time playing with the clouds. He would soar through them and around them and over them. And if there were a space in between them, he would go racing through the space as if the clouds were mountains and the space was a canyon. He just loved flying. The clouds, he knew on that particular day, were going to get together later and generate more rain than, well, certainly than Seattle has seen in a long time. And there would be lightning. The clouds would bump together and make thunder. But oh, for right now, he had such a time of it. After about an hour of flying, he was going around a cloud, and he had finagled the mechanics of the plane such that he was almost up on the left wing tip. He was trying to balance the gravity, the pull of gravity, and the lift of the plane and the speed that he was going, and he banked around that cloud beautifully. And when he came out the other side, he saw an open space in front of him. But oh my gosh, the open space was not empty, for there was another plane headed in his direction, another pilot taking a plane out and having a wonderful time, playing with the winds and dancing with the clouds. And here this plane came directly towards him. They were headed towards a collision. And each of the pilots realized that this was danger with a capital D. And the young man, with his new pilot's license right in his pocket, pulled the yoke back towards his gut and over this way, and he stamped hard on the right rudder, and the two planes went by each other very, very fast. If they had been an inch farther apart, they wouldn't have touched. If they had been an inch closer together, each plane would have lost a wing. But as it was, the planes just brushed wingtips. But it was enough that the young pilot felt his plane shudder, and he knew that this was trouble, and he needed to land his plane as soon as possible. He looked back over his left shoulder to see if he could see the plane that had gone by him, because he was thinking, that can't be right. It was a biplane with fixed wheels. It was a Newport 28, a plane that had been made in 1918. The Newport 28s were French planes that were created for use in World War I. And his plane was built in 1960. In fact, this was 1960. What was a French Newport 28 doing out there flying towards him? It can't be. It just can't be. And the young man was so worried about this plane that he circled the area looking for any debris that might have fallen. Maybe the plane has crashed. Maybe they hit hard enough. I mean, my plane is tougher than his plane was. The debris must be down there, but there wasn't anything there. The young aviator called the nearest airfield and explained what had happened and left his information and said, what time it was and where exactly they were when the two wingtips smacked into each other. But there had been no reports of plane crashes or of a plane missing. And at that point, the young pilot looked at his fuel gauge and he was reaching the Big E. So he needed to head back to his home field and hang it up for the day. And so he did. He went back to his home field, and when he had put his plane away, he went into the supervisor's office and he explained what had happened. And that man had not heard of any planes crashing, or there wasn't any debris falling anywhere, and nobody had said there were many missing pilots. Oh, the boy just knew that those wingtips had brushed. He knew what he had seen. But when he told his friends about it, his friends all laughed and said, you probably hit somebody's mailbox when you were trying to land, or you probably ran into a fence post. I mean, you're generally clumsy anyway. And everybody laughed and nobody believed him. And so finally he didn't talk about it anymore, but he knew what had happened. A few months later, there was a group of older guys who worked as a team. They loved to find old planes and restore them and bring them back to flying condition. And in fact, one of the planes that I taught about when I was at the Flight Museum here was an old plane that had been restored, and it was restored very lovingly. So I know how important it is to these teams of guys to get out there and fix the old planes. And they had been looking, they had fixed an F4F Wildcat at one point, and it was just a beautiful plane now. So they had heard about an old farmer who had a plane in his barn. And so the group of them went out to this farm and they asked the farmer, could they see the plane in the barn? And he said, oh, sure you can, but it's not worth anything now. I haven't flown it in, more than 20, 25 years. But you're welcome to see it if you want to see it. So they went out to the barn, and sure enough, there was this old Newport 28 in the barn. Now, Newport 28 is a biplane. Understand, it's got two sets of wings. So it's very, very much an older version of a flying machine. And the guys just couldn't believe it. I mean, yes, it was old. And yes, the tires were flat. And yes, it was covered with straw and dust and bird droppings and Lord knows what all else. And in the one propeller, in the casing of the propeller at the front of the plane, there was even a little bird's nest that had been built between the two blades of the propeller. And the fabric was hanging off of it. Many of the struts were broken. It was a dilapidated looking thing, but they wanted to take it on. And as they walked around on the plane, one of the old guys noticed on the left wingtip that there was some red and white paint that looked really, really new. And another one of the guys noticed as he stood on the other wing and looked into the cockpit, he could see on the floor there was a logbook. And the logbook was all dusty and covered with spider webs. And he picked it up very carefully because it was so old, it looked like it was going to fall apart any second. And he brought that over to the group of guys, and the one who'd found the paint said, look what I found. And the one who found the logbook said, yeah, look what I found. And do you remember that story that young kid told recently about having run into a Newport 28? Oh, this couldn't be the same plane, could it? But where did it get that red and white paint? So they went to the laboratories. First, they stopped at the house of the young aviator and asked if he could give them a little bit of the paint from his Cherokee Piper. And the guy said, yeah, I could. And they took both that paint sample and the paint sample from the plane in the barn to the lab. Exactly the same paint. Exactly the same year of manufacture. And they took the logbook to another lab and had the paper and the ink analyzed, and it was 40 years old. And the pilot's handwriting was very old-fashioned. It was authentic. And the very last line of the very last page in the logbook detailed the pilot's experience. His words from 40 years ago were, "Today I saw a red and white flying machine, the likes of which I have never seen."
Wow. Thank you, Anne. The unexplainable.
The unexplainable.
Wow. Awesome. Some very weird things happen in the sky.
Yes.
And they still happen today. They still happen today. I saw on the news where these real pilots were seeing unexplained moving objects in the sky. And yeah, so
Who knows?
we have another story coming on our hands. What were you saying, Barry?
I said that you can switch to gallery view so you can see everybody, and you're welcome to unmute at this time and say a few things before we finish up. I'm going to stop the recording.
Okay, I'd like to thank all of our tellers. I'll list the tellers, and you can, now that you are unmuted, you can give them all a round of applause for Anne Penfound, Rebecca Hom, Lance Lambert, Audra Sisak, Barry McWilliams, Mary Grevstad, Judith Alexander, and Anne Brindler. And don't forget to go to our chat, and in that chat there's a link for Larry's story. Thank you all for participating this evening. It's been wonderful.